All right, bad psychedelic experiences, bad trips. We've all heard about them, or at least know it's possible. Makes a lot of people scared of psychedelics. I'm just going to give you a little bit of thoughts and things to consider when taking on psychedelics. I'm not really going to go over too many precautions on how to avoid them. I'm just going to quite literally talk about them in a way that, to be honest, I don't do often when I'm discussing this stuff with my friends. Not necessarily to protect the substances. I usually warn people of the bad things that can happen if we get in a conversation about it or if they think I recommend it. I usually try to show both sides of the spectrum. But as far as personal experience, I really try not to reflect too deeply on the more extreme negative trips. And I can explain why. And this is something that other people have opened up to me about on the rare occasion that I do, or, some people have swore off tripping. And, when you ask them questions and you hear some stuff. And one thing that I've heard a couple times, this is on acid, is that they got into headspaces and the drug turned on them in a way that you could never fathom or understand. And these are very tough people. One of them is a mixed martial artist. The other one's just been through a lot of stuff. And they would say that it was undoubtedly the most difficult moment of their life. The worst experience, the one girl just basically told me that it was like, if, she could just explain it as being like a rape type thing, but just nuts and just no regard for her and a very evil feeling. And this stuff can happen. And to be honest, if you really respect these drugs and these psychedelics and you think that there is an ultimately good moral agenda behind the lessons you learn and the things you experience, having a bad trip can be very emotionally devastating, not only because of the experience, but because of your relationship and belief in the substance. If somebody really puts their heart and soul and spirit behind these substances, and I just know it's good, I know it's right, if everyone could just do acid, the world would be different, and they get really about it. These drugs can and typically do turn on you sometimes. It might not be your fault. There's really no knowing as to why the hell some of this stuff happens and why some of the stuff happens that does. Acid and mushrooms are the ones that, most people have had experience in. When most people think of a bad trip, they're describing mushroom and acid trips. Not that there's not other forms of tripping. And I know stuff like salvia is very common with bad trips, and there are bad DMT trips. But I'm going to spend a minute talking about mushrooms and acid. There are differences between these two drugs. This is not the video for it. Although there are different headspaces, I would say acid gets a little bit crazier as far as you think you're going a little bit more psychotic. And there is a clarity to mushrooms, but the bad trips can have more of a suicidal type spin. Maybe just thinking about it, considering it. There's a sort of anxious thing that goes on in people's heads. Maybe they should have been more aware of certain circumstances. This is not a video on how to avoid bad trips. There's a lot of nuance here and a lot of things to consider, and a lot of it's very personal and subjective, so it's hard to say. I will say that if you are in a bad headspace and you turn to acid or mushrooms as a way to lift you up, it might work in the beginning and it might be enough, but if you continually go back to it for that purpose, it will run out. It will turn on you. It will not be what it has been. And that is something that you have to understand about psychedelics is you cannot pigeonhole them into one thing. Sometimes I talk to people and they're like, psychedelics, mushrooms is love, mushrooms is God, mushrooms is this. It's like, I don't know. It's a lot of different stuff. It's really hard to put your finger on, but I wouldn't pigeonhole it into good, into bad, into whatever. It is a heightened state of awareness. The problem with a long duration trip like mushrooms and acid, these are easily available. There's the mescaline side of things with peyote and San Pedro cactus. There are other, there's orally activated DMT, but is mushrooms and acid get people in bad ways. And I can't stress enough, it's hard for me to even consider the couple times where I feel like I've had what was like the bad side of the risk reward with psychedelics. And I am somebody that just tries not to make anything more of it than it was. And if it continued, I would stop. The last few mushroom trips that were negative or not as pleasant, not as useful, just kind of wore me out, beat me up, made me not want to be there, made me wonder why I was even doing it, kind of forced me to have the reflection that it's not good for me to be doing this right now, or I really don't want to do this. I want it to be positive. I want to maintain a healthy relationship with psychedelics. And if there comes a point in time where I should go years or the rest of my life without experimenting with them, I would like to learn that lesson the gentle way and not the hardest way possible. But I can tell you firsthand, the first time I had a bad experience on DMT, it kind of broke my heart. I don't tell this story much, so it's kind of hard for me to really open up about, but I had a decent amount of it to share with some friends who wanted to do it, and myself, and for various reasons, I had reasons to test different stuff that was going on with it, basically recrystallization processes, etc. And I was doing it more frequently than I had ever done because it had never gone badly. What's the big deal? It doesn't even last. I mean, if you're just doing a couple hits here, 20 minutes and you're back to normal, 10 minutes and you're walking around already thinking about it if you want to be. You really got to force yourself to stay in there. Well, the trip started getting a little bit longer, a little bit less, I would come back less crisp and energized and more just like, what the fuck? And I had a trip where I got caught up in what is called a terror loop, or just a looping of time, and something felt like it was repeating forever. And I was like worried. I'm like, I felt like it was going on forever. Like the same line of the song would repeat, my same thought would repeat. And I would like say to myself, like, did this already happen? And it would start over again, like Groundhog's Day. And I didn't know what to do. I went back, I lied in my bed. I tried to like kind of go to sleep, and I was really weird. My whole body was feeling like electric-y. And what would happen was I would run this loop back, and now it started seeming like the DMT or this energy inside of me was like shocking my system and letting me know that it was inside of me, and that it was like not gonna get it out of my system. It wasn't going to go anywhere. And it just kept like shocking my body. Like, I don't know how to explain it. I know this is not the best example, but I just wanted to share an anecdotal experience and just let you know how abstract this stuff can be. I promise you this was a very difficult thing to go through, but I just cannot put words on it. I can just promise you, after all of the DMT experiences I had up to that point, I had no idea this was capable. Now, I had read stuff online. I know I read a lot of like the DMT Nexus, and I see all the trip reports and people exploring hyperspace in a way where it's almost like they're playing some like Battlestar Galactica game, and they're really going into some deep stuff where I feel like I've seen that stuff a little, but I don't connect to all the weird places or people who are more weary of DMT. I've had much more positive experiences in general. So, or like more spiritual and more, I've had a lot of godly experiences, less evil stuff, less demonic looking stuff. I don't really see much of that. So this was like a very creepy thing for me and a very scary thing for me. And I don't need to go much further. It just lasted for seemingly forever. I do think it lasted a good hour, which is a lot longer than you'd expect. and I felt like I couldn't stand up at one point. I felt like my whole body was being electrocuted, and I felt like the DMT was kind of like laughing at me. This same thing that had held me and nurtured me and it cared for me, you know. I'm not saying it's literally the same thing because DMT opens you up to different things. But this path, this place I had gone before had always been so good to me, or just crazy in a way that, yeah, I'll take a look. What the hell? And I thought that the best thing to do would be, well, I had a bad experience. I didn't like the way it made me felt. I was holding a little bit of anxiety. I thought I needed to just, well, shit, I'm just going to do it again, you know, tomorrow. What the hell? I need to get this. I need to get this out of my system. That is not the answer. And I believe that is the slippery slope that a lot of people go through. I'm not saying that a good trip won't clear your bad headspace. But if a substance is making you feel that way, you really need to let it breathe. You know, I tried it a couple times too soon after that to think it would kind of like, you know, get me back into that positive state. And eventually it just didn't. It was weird. It wasn't as bad as that, but it was putting me in headspaces that were uncomfortable. It was leaving a lingering negative effect. Only a couple days, but it was. And I had to take a break. And honestly, it was only a couple months. It was like maybe 3 months that I took off from anything psychedelic completely. And yeah, I tried DMT again and it was amazing. And I have not done the mushrooms. But to wrap up, to go back to the mushrooms and acid thing real quick, something to consider with mushrooms and acid is the duration. If you get caught in an anxious mushroom trip, the ones where you just feel like your skin is crawling, you just don't want to be there, you want to feel normal again. You want to be able to watch the TV and it not be weird. You want to be able to think. You want to be able to do normal stuff, eat, drive a car, and you're just in this weird space. You know there's no more trip to be had, or the trip didn't come the way you thought it would, and you're just in this bizarre mess. Or like that's a common one for mushrooms. For acid, sometimes it's just shit's crazy and time's moving so slow and there's so much time to have. And then, yeah, the peak's worn off. Usually for me, the peak isn't that bad. I know that's not the case for some bad trips, but for me, the peak of the mushrooms and the acid has always been more enjoyable. It's the come down. And I can only give you my personal experience here because I could regurgitate what other people have said, but you've already probably read some of that, or it's easy to read a lot of that. Mushrooms and acid, you might feel weird for 4 hours, especially acid, after the trip is really over. And, you know, it's a little bit of a scary feeling. It's a little bit of a disconnected feeling. Sometimes you might feel like you need to get back into the work week. You might need to do these things to kind of like glue you back into reality. Like time also, like it feels like a lot of time has passed. That has been a very therapeutic benefit, you know, for psychedelic experience after a breakup, which is risky. But I'm just saying for me, it's really up to the distance and the space between me and the headspace of being in that relationship. And I think that's a very therapeutic tool. And, you know, but more so on the DMT side anymore as far as where I would go with it. But I did have a mushroom trip after a breakup once and maybe like a couple in a short period of time. And it was nice and it moved time along. But similarly, if you're going out there and you're trying to trip all weekend or something, you're going to come back the next week and everyone else is going to be like, yeah, the weekend flew by. And you're going to be like, I feel like I haven't been here in forever. I feel like years have passed by. You do not want to get too screwed up with your sense of time and the days and the weeks. And if you're already smoking pot all the time on top of it, and you're adding this into the mix, you've got to be able to stay glued to your reality and stay comfortable. You know, also, if you're going into trips with things you're going to worry about and be anxious about, and you start thinking about it, you're going to think about it in a way you have never thought about it. And then you're going to try to run from it. And that's the kind of stuff that makes people start thinking of these things. Next thing they know, they're like, God, I could just fucking kill myself. And, you know, if anyone knows me and they're watching this, they don't have to be scared about anything like that. There are a lot of things that can make you feel that way temporarily in the world, or you could relate. But I'm just saying psychedelics is one of them. And it is something to consider. And it is a reason to maybe never partake. That being said, I still believe that if you are to go down the path of psychedelics, and you come in very, very interested, very intrigued by the stories you've heard, and you just try it and you just kind of scratch the surface, have a mushroom trip or two, you do acid once, do DMT a few times, maybe something else once, twice, you're probably going to benefit from it. You're probably not going to get caught up in too negative of a place. You might kind of see the ups and downs of a long duration experience, and you might kind of understand how it could go badly, but you might not have to experience it. But if you're watching this and you were worried about getting in these bad headspaces, definitely take note to them starting to feel a little worse. Definitely take note of them not having that same vibrant energy. Also, it being too familiar and you starting to get bored with it. You do not want to be bored of the trip. You have got to want to be tripping the whole duration of the trip, and you've got to be willing to deal with that long come down. This is not something you can dodge, you know? And I don't recommend having alternatives with some people say they need like some sort of pill or something to come down from them. I guess if you're already going there, it's something to consider. Like if you're somebody who's into the benzos, or you're into, I don't know, all that stuff, the Xanaxes and all that. I don't know how healthy and risky it is, but shit, if you're already doing it, are you very risk conscious, anyway, or are you that concerned? I would say that consider the fact that if you're in a bad headspace, you at least have whatever to fall back on that you would. For me, I try to control my breathing. Maybe I'll try to call somebody or talk to somebody. I will just try to move on from that headspace, or just deal with it, or just let it happen, or just try not to worry. I use it as a mental challenge for me. And that is actually part of where, the positive side of a bad trip can be that once you've made it through it, you have made it through something very difficult. So there can be a positive side to it. It can be a toughening of sorts. This is a tough one to fully put the nail on, because bad trips in general are going to be abstract because they're psychedelic experiences. So we could go into detail of what the visuals might look like, the energies before you. But at the end of the day, just know that shit can get suicidal when it's never gotten suicidal before. You can feel psychotic in a way and worry in a way that you are never going to come back to reality. And these things that you think are all loving, care about you, hold you in high regard, can not only show you how small and unimportant you are, they can make you feel terrible like you've never felt terrible before. This is powerful stuff. These are powerful beings, or whatever you're doing, whatever type of headspaces you're getting into. It's powerful shit. It's extraordinary. And it can extraordinarily wreck your feels. It's that simple. Be aware, be mindful. If you do have bad experiences, please do not try to get too caught up in I guess you can't tell somebody not to be traumatized over something, and you wouldn't tell somebody not to be traumatized over something that's really bad. But at the same time, please try to have an open mind with dealing with this type of thing, and try to find it within yourself ways to not let these drugs that you're doing for positive effect take such a negative effect on you. That's tough to do. Consider things, consider your usage, consider your intent, consider whether or not you really want to do this, whether or not it's really a good idea, whether or not you really respect the nature of these compounds and what you're putting in your body. So consider all of those things. To compare personally, for me, I know this page, as far as psychedelics go, I feel like I have more to offer when talking about DMT. although I have a decent amount of mushroom experience as well. Um, I think that DMT is at its worst only when it starts to show you that it isn't all like love and happiness and this, and then you keep searching for something and it's not trying to show you that right now. You've got to let it sit. You've got to let it sit till you're really curious again, until you really you almost have forgotten even the bad experience. That is the fortunate nature of DMT. It is hard to remember. I've had more experiences that were somewhat negative, but I really try not to consider them much else, and it really helps me. I can't avoid the headspaces I've been in on, the acid trip that made me never really want to do acid again, and the mushroom trips that kind of led to me to be like, nah, I'm good. I can feel them a bit more. They have more of a lingering effect. For me, I can't speak for everybody there, but I think it would take a more, strung together series of bad DMT trips to fuck with you the same way as one bad acid, one bad mushroom trips. Also, lastly, and this is not the best, and sometimes people get the only way you can have a bad mushroom trip is if you don't take enough. That's a Terrence McKenna quote. He didn't say it like that, but I think that's his quote. Anyway, there is some truth and validity to there. If you're doing it to trip, but you're already so nervous that you are like, well, I just want to do a little. I just want to do that. That there is like a part of which you are microdosing, say below 0.2 grams of mushrooms. Then you get, or even 0.5, depending how strong they are and how they affect you. But when you start getting into that like 0.7 to like 1.2, maybe 1.5 range, you might just be eating anxiety. If there's really no trip, you're not going to settle into the experience. You're going to be waiting for it to come. It's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel the come up of a trip, because a lot of times the come up and that weird body load, that still is there. So all the negative stuff can sometimes be just as strong without what you actually want out of a psychedelic experience. I think that a lot of people have bad headspaces in lower to like slightly lower moderate, in that, like not going in enough to really have a trip. But yeah, eating an eighth, eating 5 grams, that can go wrong too. It can go badly. That's enough discussion on this. I don't know if I covered anything specifically that was too monumental, but it's just some food for thought. Safe travels. Enjoy. Try not to have anything too bad happen to you.